forgot time. In a quiet town where the days passed gently and the nights stretched long and still, there stood an old clock tower at the edge of the square. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Tall and silent, with ivy climbing its stone walls, the tower watched over the town without ever changing. Its clock face, once bright and golden, had softened over the years into a muted glow that only seemed to come alive after sunset. During the day, the clock ticked as expected. Steady, reliable, ordinary. But at night, something was different. The ticking slowed. Sometimes, it stopped entirely. And on certain evenings, when the air was calm and the sky was clear, the clock seemed to forget time altogether. Most people never noticed. They slept through it, wrapped in quiet dreams. But a boy named Ellen did. Ellen lived in a small house just across from the square, where the sound of the clock had always been a part of his days. It marked his mornings, his meals, his evenings, and for a long time, he had never thought about it. Until one night, when he woke and heard nothing at all. No ticking, no movement, only silence. He sat up slowly, listening. The room was still, the world outside resting in its usual calm. But the absence of the clock felt noticeable, like something important had quietly stepped away. Ellen stood and walked to the window. The tower stood as it always had, tall against the night sky. The clock face glowed faintly, but its hands were still, not broken, just unmoving. Curious, he stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the soft scent of night flowers and distant trees. The square was empty, the stones beneath his feet holding the warmth of the day that had passed. He walked toward the tower, his steps slow and steady. As he drew closer, he noticed something unusual. The light from the clock was different, softer, warmer, almost like a quiet invitation. He reached the door at the base of the tower. It was slightly open. Ellen hesitated for a moment, his hand resting gently against the wood. The silence inside was deeper than the silence outside, as though the space within the tower held its own kind of stillness. Then, without hurry, he stepped inside. The air was calm and cool, filled with the faint scent of old wood and stone. A narrow staircase curved upward along the wall, leading toward the clock above. And from somewhere higher up, there was a soft glow. Not bright, not sharp, just enough to guide him. Ellen began to climb. Each step felt quiet beneath his feet, the world below fading as he moved higher. The sound of his breathing, the gentle rhythm of his movement, these were the only things that remained. When he reached the top, he found himself in a small room just behind the clock face. And there, at the center of the room, was something he had never expected. The clock was not made of gears alone. It was filled with light, soft, drifting light that moved slowly, like floating dust caught in a beam of sun. It did not spin or turn. It simply existed, shifting gently within the space. Ellen stepped closer. The hands of the clock stood still, suspended in place, but the light continued to move. As he watched, he began to understand. The clock had not stopped. It had simply paused, not because it was broken, but because it no longer needed to move. For a moment, Ellen felt something settle within him, a quiet awareness. Time was still passing, even if the hands were not. The night was still unfolding. The world was still resting. And in this space, there was no need to measure it. He sat down beside the soft glow, his back resting lightly against the wall. The silence did not feel empty. It felt complete, like a moment that did not need to end. Minutes passed, or perhaps something else entirely. Ellen did not try to count. Eventually, the light within the clock began to shift. Not suddenly, not sharply, just enough to suggest that something was gently returning. The hands moved, slowly, quietly, resuming their place without resistance. The ticking followed, soft at first, then steady. Ellen stood, watching as the clock returned to its familiar rhythm. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. He made his way back down the staircase, his steps unhurried, his thoughts calm. When he stepped outside, the square was just as he had left it. The night air, the quiet buildings, the distant glow of windows, it was all the same. But the silence he had noticed before was gone. The ticking had returned, and it sounded softer now, gentler, as though it no longer needed to remind anyone of its presence. Ellen walked back to his home, the tower behind him once again still and quiet. At the door, he paused, not because something was missing, but because nothing was. That night, as he lay in bed, the sound of the clock faded into the background once more. Not gone, just part of everything. And somewhere within the tower, the light continued to drift softly, waiting for the next moment when time would no longer need to be measured, only felt, and gently allowed to pass. Ellen remained still for a moment longer, listening as the steady ticking settled into the quiet of the tower. It no longer sounded like something that measured his time. It sounded like something that simply existed alongside it. He stepped closer once more, drawn not by curiosity now, but by a calm understanding. The light within the clock had softened again, returning to its slow, drifting movement. It did not seem concerned with the hands or the rhythm that had resumed. It continued as it always had, unhurried, undisturbed. For a while, Ellen stood there without thinking of anything at all. The night outside continued, though he did not feel its passing. The silence inside the tower wrapped around him gently, like a quiet space that asked for nothing in return. He noticed small details he had not seen before, the faint lines in the wood of the walls, shaped by time and touch, the soft way the air moved when he shifted his weight. Even the ticking itself had a softness now, as though it had learned to exist without urgency. He placed his hand lightly against the edge of the clock. The surface was cool, but not cold. It felt steady, grounded. Not like something mechanical, but something that had been there long before anyone had thought to measure the hours. A thought came to him then, simple and quiet. Perhaps the clock did not forget time. Perhaps it remembered something else. He did not try to define the thought further. It stayed with him just long enough to feel understood, and then it drifted away like everything else in the tower. After some time, he turned toward the staircase again. The descent felt slower than before, not because the steps had changed, but because there was no reason to hurry. Each step was clear, each movement complete on its own. When he reached the door, he paused once more. The square outside was unchanged. The same stones, the same buildings, the same distant glow of windows where others slept or rested in their own quiet ways. But the space between those things felt different now, softer, more open. He stepped out into the night. The air met him gently, carrying the quiet sounds of leaves shifting somewhere far off, and the faint presence of the world settling into rest. Behind him, the clock continued its steady rhythm. He listened to it for a moment, not counting the seconds, not marking the distance between them, just listening. Then he began to walk. His steps followed no particular path at first. He moved through the square, past the familiar corners and quiet edges, noticing how each place held its own kind of stillness. Nothing demanded his attention. Nothing needed to be done. It was simply enough to be there. Eventually, he found himself near the edge of the town, where the ground gave way to open fields. The horizon stretched quietly beneath the night sky, the stars scattered gently above. He stood there for a while, looking out without searching for anything. The feeling from the tower remained with him, not as a thought, but as a kind of quiet presence. Time was still passing. The night would move toward morning. The days would continue as they always had. But none of it felt pressing. None of it needed to be held on to. After a while, he turned back toward his home. The streets were empty, the doors closed, the windows dim. The world rested without effort, without needing to keep track of itself. When he reached his door, he opened it slowly, stepping inside as though he did not want to disturb the calm he carried with him. The room was just as he had left it. Simple. Still. He lay down once more, the sound of the clock returning faintly through the walls. But now, it blended into everything else. It was no longer something separate, no longer something that needed to be followed. It was simply there. And as his eyes grew heavy, the space between each tick seemed to widen, not because the clock had slowed, but because he no longer measured it. Sleep came quietly, without effort, without thought. And somewhere within the tower, the soft drifting light continued its gentle movement, waiting for the next moment when someone might need to step outside of time, if only for a little while.